So a little while ago I read a book and I've been reading it again recently, so I thought I'd share some of the things I learnt from it with you this morning. So the book is called Choosing to Cheat, Who Wins When Family and Work Collide, and it's by Pastor Andy Stanley. So I think off the bat, just to say, when he says cheat, what he's talking about is we have a finite amount of time in our day. We only have 24 hours, some of that we have to sleep. So when we're juggling all the different things that we have to do during the day, we're having to take time from somewhere else and give it to something else. So in his terminology, he's saying we're cheating one thing here to give to someone there. So it's an interesting terminology. I think it's designed just to catch people's attention more than anything else. But when I'm using that terminology that's what he means. He means we're taking time from someone to give to someone else. We're saying, you can't have my time now, I'm going to give it here. So our lives are full and we don't have enough days in our week to fit all that we need in. So this means something has to give. And as I said, Andy Stanley calls this choosing to cheat. We have to cheat someone or something to give our time somewhere else. In my own personal life, for a number of years, this was work. I'd been made redundant from a couple of jobs and I ended up working at a bakery. So to start off with, it was 6 days a week. It was 2 to 3 hours in the morning. It wasn't anything flash. But over time, that slowly developed to 12 to 16-hour days, over 6 days a week. And then eventually it turned into about 7 days a week at about the same time, 12 to 16-hour days. I think the longest day I did was nearly 18 hours, which is just ridiculous. Because it was a gradual creep, you don't always see it coming, and you always think, oh, it's only for a short period of time, it's going to be just for a little while and then it'll stop. But during that, I was stealing time from my family and I was giving it to my employer, my work. So this doesn't just have to be confined to work. It could be housework, it could be gardening. If you have a hobby, if you're spending a lot of time in your hobby, it could be that. Volunteering. It can also be your private time with God. Anything that requires some of our time takes time away from somewhere else. For some of us who have less demands on our time, we're able to fit more in, so we can do more before we reach that threshold of having to take from somewhere. But eventually all of us get to that point. So my circumstances at home, my cheating home for work started to affect pretty much everything at home. So the kids were very unsettled. They were in before school care. They became very unsettled. It was often that they couldn't even get to school that day because of circumstances that happened in before school care. So there was a real big effect on the kids. If they did get to school, they didn't necessarily get through the whole day. It was often that I'd get phone calls halfway through the day and I'd be calling mum to go and pick them up. It had an effect on my relationship with Ree. Because I wasn't home and I wasn't putting the time I needed into that relationship, slowly over time we became more distant. Over time it became harder just to talk about the things that you normally talk to them about. It becomes so consuming that when you get home you're still thinking about it because you don't get that downtime just to switch off. When I was home, I was exhausted. Ree will tell you I'd be sitting on the couch and she'd walk in and I'd be fast asleep. And I was very rarely up later than about 9 o'clock at night. We couldn't go out. We couldn't go out to tea just with family. Weekends, we couldn't organise anything because I was away every Saturday and often on a Sunday. So it meant that we became more isolated as well. The friends that we had just slowly drifted away, except for the real solid ones. Who were willing to sort of put up with it. By cheating at work, I was destroying my relationship with my family. So we don't intentionally cheat. It's not something that we decide, all right, now I'm just going to take all this time I have with my family, I'm going to give it to my workplace or my hobby or whatever. It's something that we do either creeps in or we have a reason for it. So for me, like I said, I'd been made redundant twice, I'd lost jobs, and I found that the skills that I had weren't easily transferable into another job. I'd worked in security, I'd worked in management, but these things didn't. People looked at that, and from the security field, they looked at me and thought, oh, he's going to get bored, he's too overqualified. From a management field in different industries, they looked at me and went, oh, he's just a security guard, he won't know what he's doing. So it sort of knocks out a whole heap of stuff. So I felt I needed more transferable skills, and at the bakery I got offered an apprenticeship, or I asked for an apprenticeship and they said that they'd put me through one. So for a while, I'm doing this work because for me, in my mind, I'm going, well, I'm going to come out with a trade. I'm going to be a baker. Everyone needs bread. So I'm going to be able to work anywhere. I can go to Woolies, I can go to Coles. I'll be able to get a job somewhere. As the hours built up, I kept telling myself, oh, things will get better. It's just a season. He's just trying to expand. He's trying to build. Once that settles down, hours will become more stable. Everything will teeter into a normality and we'll be right. It doesn't always work that way. Once we sort of get into a trap of building ourselves up like this, things don't always go back to where they were. Andy Stanley describes it as giving people boulders. As I'm taking time away from my family, I'm giving them a boulder to hold. And I'm going, can you just hold this for me? And I'm just going to go over here and do what I need to do. And over time, as you give people more and more boulders, they're getting their arms full and they're sort of starting to struggle. Eventually, they will get to a point that they can't hold it anymore and they'll drop them. At that moment when they drop them, we're not looking at all these times that we've asked them to hold these boulders. We look at the one instance where we've taken what we see as a small little boulder and given it to them and it's dropped and the world ends. Because for the person holding them, they can remember all the boulders that they're holding because they're holding them. But for the person who's giving them the boulders, they can't remember past that instant last boulder. So it can cause a whole heap of strife. So my experience has been around work-life balance, but it isn't exclusively to work. It could be the person that has to keep their house spotlessly clean, who will spend time, hours in a day, cleaning their house and isn't spending the time they need with their kids and their family. It could be that they have a hobby, they go fishing, playing golf, or out for coffees with friends, and they're doing that multiple times a week. All these things take time from somewhere else. So how do we get the balance right? So there's a great example of this in Daniel. So from Daniel 1, during the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylon and placed them in the treasure house of his God. He then ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, good-looking young men, he said. Make sure that they are well versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. So here we have Nebuchadnezzar enacting a time-honoured tradition of conquering empires. He's taking the cream of Israel and he's turning them into the cream of Babylon. He's training them in their ways. He's trying to build them up and he's taking away everything about them that is their old self. He's taking away their clothes. He's giving them new names, a new identity, and he's trying to convert them to their way of life. In the end, he was trying to make them Babylonian. But Daniel determined not to defile himself by eating food and wine given to them by the king, asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel, but he responded, "I am afraid of the Lord, of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I am afraid the king will have me beheaded." So there's two things here, and I'm sure it's been spoken before. The food that he was given came from the king's table, and it was common in that time that they would offer the food to their god. So, and then they would take that and the king would eat it and his entourage would eat it. This was a symbol for the Babylonians of the supremacy of their gods. Your God couldn't sustain you. Your God failed you and now you're here. And now you're eating the food offered to our God. Our God is greater than yours. Daniel at this point had a choice to make. Do I cheat my God, my invisible king, or do I cheat this very real king who's here, who can have me killed, who could cause me pain, and serve him? So Daniel chose to cheat this visible, powerful, present king for an even powerfuler present king that he could feel but could not see. So what did Daniel do? So he did two things. Firstly, he made up his mind. Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to him by the king. He made his mind up. I'm not going to do it. Secondly, he came up with a plan. He didn't just say, I'm not going to do it, and just go, I'm not eating that. He went up to the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. That in itself would have been a huge risk. Going up to ask this chief of staff, do you mind if I eat something else? At that point, he could have just gone no and made him eat it. He could have just had him dragged out and killed. That, for Daniel, was a great step of faith. But then the next line is, it says, now God. And I just want to look at now God. Up until this point, it's been Daniel. He's been faithful to God. He said he's going to do these things. He's looked at doing these things. He's taken that step of faith. Now, God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. Daniel's act of faith allowed God to act. We don't know what God is willing or capable of doing once we set our priorities right. Once we've taken that step and make up our minds to set ourselves on a plan, now God. For me, now God has sustained my family. When I made the decision to cut back my work hours and thought, I can't do this anymore. It's killing me, it's killing my family, and I'm not serving God the way he wants me to. When I made that decision to step right back, God was able to step in and fill the void that I had been trying to fill myself. He sustained us as my hours cut back and less money was coming in. We still had enough to put food on the table. Things got tight at times, but we always were able to feed our family, clothe our family, and get through. And that wasn't us, that was God. That was God honouring the decision that we had made. If it wasn't for now God, I wouldn't be standing here today. I probably wouldn't be in church because that was where I was at 18, 20 months ago. It was that step of faith, putting my priorities right, honouring God, that then brought me to this point. But he responded, I am afraid of the Lord the King, who has ordered that you eat the food and wine, and if you become pale and thin compared to the other youths of your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded. The chief of staff was worried about how it would affect him. If I let you do this, I'm in trouble. I'm going to bear the consequences. This is the same hurdle that we come up against if we start to shift our time. If we're going to a boss and saying, look, I'm going to leave at 4:30 every day. I can't stay until 5 because if I stay till 5, I'm in the traffic for an hour, that. Can we work out a way that I can get out of here early? They're going to be concerned about how that's going to affect them, how that will affect their bottom line. If you're in a volunteer organisation, it's not uncommon when you go up, you go, look, I just can't do it anymore. They're like, oh, who's going to do what you're doing? Who's going to come in and open up early in the morning? So they have a concern about how it will affect them. And that was where Daniel had his plan. He came and he goes, well, this is what we can do. I'll eat this for 10 days, and if it's all good, we'll just keep going. How does that sound? So if you go in with a plan and you're not just going in to say, I want to stop, then that makes it easier to overcome that hurdle. So Daniel spoke to the attendant who was appointed chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked healthier and better nourished than the other young men who had been eating the food assigned to the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of food and wine provided for the others. So if we're going to make a change, Andy Stanley says that we should put God to the test. That's a very Old Testament concept. But what he's saying there is we need to step back and allow God time to bless us. God has ability to provide for us in ways that we can't imagine. And when we're in a situation, it's hard to see how he can work. We have to let God give us a now God moment. When you invest your time where God would like you to invest your time, we're not really testing God, we're testing ourselves, our trust and faith that God will fill the gaps. Andy Stanley says, when we honour God's order and priorities, that he believes that God will bless us in both arenas and everyone wins. When we're right with God, he blesses us. He blesses our workplace. He blesses our friends. He blesses our family. When we don't have our priorities in the correct place, no one wins. In my workplace, I saw that. My priorities weren't right and I wasn't being blessed. My family wasn't being blessed to the full extent that they could have been. And the business that I was in wasn't being blessed. It wasn't moving forward. If anything, it was slowly crawling backwards. So what happens when we do this? So God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of wisdom and literature, and God gave Daniel a special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. When the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter regarding wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. When we honour God and put our priorities in the right place, he honours us. He will sustain us and he will equip us. So everyone here today has a limited period of time. We have 24 hours, like I said. Some of that we have to sleep. So we're taking from somewhere to give to somewhere else. So I guess the main question is, where are you cheating? Are you cheating at work over home? Are you cheating in your hobbies? When I was talking to Rhea about this, she said, sometimes I feel like I'm cheating with my time at God. I'll pray during the day, but it's opportunistic prayer. I've needing a car space, or I've hurt my ankle or something like that, but not sitting down and spending that intentional time with God. Who are you cheating? Family? God? Friends? Kids? Are you feeling cheated? Do you feel that someone in your life could be giving you more time? I know Reed definitely would have answered yes to that question. Are you willing to have this conversation with yourself, your family, and God? And are you willing to put a change to the test to allow God to move like Daniel did? When we honour God and put our priorities in the right place, He honours us. He will sustain us and He will equip us. And that went a lot quicker than I was expecting. So we'll just pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you that you give us an opportunity to trust you. That when we do trust you, that you bless us immensely, Lord. Father, I just pray if there's anyone here whose priorities aren't quite right, if they're spending too much time in an area that you would prefer them to spend more with their family, you'd prepare them to spend more with you, Lord. Father, I just pray that you convict them today, that over the next few weeks that they start to spend more time in the area and get their priorities right with you, Lord. Father, I just pray that you're able to give them a now God moment, where you're able to step in and bless them and just equip them and sustain them in a way that they never thought that you would possibly do with them, Lord. And we just thank you for your blessing and your mercy and your power forever. In Jesus' name, amen.